Today we are talking about the rights people have within the criminal justice system.
Good, because I have a friend who just got in trouble, and he's wondering what rights he has.
It depends on what happened.
The police arrested him for shoplifting after they found tennis shoes in his backpack that he didn't pay for.
That doesn't sound good.
He claims that the police didn't have the right to search him.
The Fourth Amendment protects individuals from unreasonable search and seizure by the government. Can you give me more detail on how the police came to suspect him stealing the shoes?
He didn't go into that. He just said they didn't have a warrant. I thought you had to have a warrant to search.
There are a few exceptions to the search warrant rule, but there has to be probable cause. For example, if an officer sees what he knows is evidence of a criminal offense, a search warrant isn't needed. That's called the in plain view exception. But police must have probable cause in order to obtain a search warrant, which means they must convince a judge they have information that the search would produce evidence that a criminal offense has been committed.
So, does a search warrant mean that he's charged with the crime?
No. The Fifth Amendment identifies important protections we have when we are subject to criminal charges. For example, if the accused is charged with a major criminal offense, or what we call a felony, the Fifth Amendment requires that the formal charge, known as indictment, must be issued by a grand jury.
I thought the jury determined whether or not a person was guilty.
They do, but there are actually two types of juries. The grand jury referred to in the Fifth Amendment hears all the evidence that the prosecution has and decides if the accused should be sent to trial. This charge is called an indictment or a true bill. The Supreme Court ruled long ago that states are not bound by the grand jury requirement. Thus, while federal courts must use grand juries, states are free to choose whether or not to do so. Some states, like Texas, choose to use grand juries, but other states do not. The jury provision in the Sixth Amendment is the jury that determines whether someone charged with a crime is guilty or not guilty. This type of jury is referred to as petty jury.
The Fifth and Sixth Amendments sound a lot alike. I'm having trouble distinguishing the two.
Think about it this way. The Sixth Amendment is all about things that happen in the courtroom, while the Fifth Amendment applies to the courtroom as well as things that happen outside the courtroom.
Like what?
Well, the Fifth Amendment also includes a clause that states you can't be compelled to be a witness against yourself. This is known as the no self-incrimination clause. In the courtroom, this means the defendant cannot be forced to take the witness stand. Outside the courtroom, the Supreme Court has ruled that prior to any questioning, the police must inform criminal suspects of their right to remain silent, and that anything they do say can be used against them at trial.
That explains those crime shows when they say, "You have the right to remain silent." Is that all the Fifth Amendment says?
The amendment also says that you can't be tried twice for the same offense by the same government, which is called double jeopardy, and that you are guaranteed due process of law.
I remember due process. We talked about it when we were learning about incorporation. Doesn't it have to do with the idea of fairness and making sure laws and behaviors of the government are treating people fairly?
That's right. Now there's only one part left on the Fifth Amendment, and it actually doesn't have anything to do with rights in a criminal case.
I saw that when I read the amendment. It said something about private property being taken for public use without just compensation. But I'm not exactly sure what that means. Can the government just take your property?
This part of the amendment is called the Takings Clause. But it doesn't mean that they can't just take your property for any reason. It generally means they can take private property using what is called eminent domain to build things like roads, schools, libraries, firehouses, things that will benefit the public.
Like when a city wants to build a new football stadium and needs the land that someone's house is on?
Exactly. But the city has to buy the property from the owners. The amendment provides that the owners get just compensation.
It seems like there could be some confusion about what benefits the public. I could see a road and school, but if you don't like football, you probably won't agree that it benefits the public.
You're right. There's usually not a debate about just compensation, but the term public use has generated some disagreement in the past, and the courts have to weigh in.
Yikes. The Fifth Amendment has a lot. But I see what you mean now about things outside the courtroom as well as inside.
Yes, the Sixth Amendment begins by guaranteeing a person a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury.
I'm thinking the Sixth Amendment is all about the trial, since it takes place in a courtroom.
Speedy does not mean a trial must be over in an hour or month. It has to do with the amount of time that passes from when an accused is formally charged with a crime and brought to trial. Public simply means that the trial is not held behind closed doors, but is open to the public, including the press. An impartial jury means that members of the jury must be individuals whose minds are not made up until they've heard all the evidence and are not prejudiced for or against the accused.
Doesn't it also say you have the right to an attorney?
Right. You definitely want an attorney at your trial. An attorney will make sure that all of your other rights are asserted and protected. For example, you have the right to confront witnesses that are brought against you and the right to call witnesses in your favor. The attorney would question the witnesses to help explain the details of the case, as well as cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses.
But what if my friend can't afford an attorney?
Good question. For a long time in state courts, if the accused could not afford an attorney, they had to defend themselves. This is called pro se. But in the latter half of the 20th century, the Supreme Court ruled that, in state courts, the government must provide an attorney where a jail sentence of any length is possible.
So what happens if my friend is found guilty? Does he have any rights then?
Your friend has the right to appeal the trial court decision to a court of appeals. An appeal can involve many issues relating to guilt or innocence or punishment, including whether your friend received a fair trial within the requirements of the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments. Also, the 8th Amendment does provide for no excessive fines or bail, and it protects your friend against cruel and unusual punishment.
Cruel and unusual punishment? Could you give me an example?
Here's one. If your friend is found guilty of shoplifting, his sentence can't be life in prison. That would be cruel and unusual punishment.
Oh, so like if the time doesn't fit the crime.
Something like that.
But then again, don't do the crime. If you can't do the time, don't do it.